Welcome everybody to Valimail's webinar this morning, DIY versus automated DMARC. We're going to be covering some of the challenges and pitfalls different IT orgs face when implementing DMARC at their organizations. Some housekeeping items before we get started. Please submit questions to the chat. We will try and get to those at the end of this presentation when we do a Q&A. Everybody will be getting these slides emailed to them afterward as well. So to kick us off, just want to introduce myself. My name is Warren Duff. I'm the Director of Content Marketing at Valimail, joining you from Denver, Colorado. I'm going to be hosting and running the show here. I'm joined with my two colleagues. I'm going to hand it over to Hunter.
My name is Hunter Sapp. I'm the Senior Manager of Customer Advocacy and Retention here at Valimail. So I help customers understand the value of the product and make sure that they're getting the most out of it, and just helping them trust their email a little bit more. I'll pass that over to Kenneth.
And I'm Kenneth Schwartzman. I've been at Valimail for a few years now. I currently run the sales engineering team, and I've also done a lot of onboarding to the Valimail platform. So happy to talk to you all.
That's awesome. So a bit more about our agenda today. Going to be covering at a very high level what DMARC is, talking about some of the challenges of implementing DMARC at your organization, some of the other hurdles like the 10 DNS lookup limit, identifying senders, implementing a DMARC policy, as well as maintaining DMARC enforcement. As I said at the top of the recording, there will be a Q&A at the end of the session, so go ahead and submit questions as you come up with them, and we'll see what we can get to. So to kick us off, Hunter, hoping you can talk to me and explain DMARC a bit more, what it is and how it started.
Of course, DMARC is domain-based messaging authentication, reporting, and conformance, which is a long way of saying we eliminate exact domain spoofing with this standard. How do we do this? Well, it improves upon two shortcomings of earlier protocols, SPF and DKIM. SPF was a IP-based way of authenticating email, and DKIM was a key-based way of authenticating email. The combination of the two is what makes the DMARC protocol today. Through the authentication portion and making sure that the email is actually delivered, this helps protect your brand. Through the reporting aspect of it, this provides global visibility and allows you to see what is sending on behalf of you at this time, and ultimately prevents shadow IT. Through the authentication, this ultimately increases email deliverability through those two things as well.
That's great. So Kenneth, I was hoping you could talk to me a bit more about the challenges of actually implementing DMARC. I think for a lot of organizations out there, email authentication and DMARC specifically is thought of as an easy to implement form of email protection, and it's something that their IT can handle and maintain in-house. Maybe you can walk us through the typical process for implementing DMARC.
Sure. And again, we're agnostic. We do want everybody to get to what is called DMARC enforcement, which is what we're going to be talking about in more detail in a few slides. But the idea is that you start out with the R in DMARC for reporting. You're going to want to make sure you're getting these reports in. And as you go through, in order to get to enforcement, you're going to need to make sure, like Hunter mentioned, that your SPF is correct and your DKIM is correct. But for each sending service that you use, whether it's an internal server or a cloud-based service. So you're going to need to set up an SPF record. You're going to need to make sure that that SPF record has the correct includes from all these alignable services. And if they also support DKIM, you're going to want to set that up in your own DNS. And usually when you start your record, what you're doing is you're starting at what is called a none policy, P equals none, which means you're just monitoring things and you're getting these reports and you put in an address to collect these two. As you start collecting these reports, you're going to want to make sure that your DKIM and SPF are aligned. And then you're going to repeat this process for all the domains that you own. And on some of them, depending on how large your domain is or how it's organized, depending on the subdomains, you're going to need to do this for some of the subdomains as well. Certain services only use subdomains, for example. So you're going to make sure that if those send as the subdomain, then those need to be set up correctly. And holistically, you want to make sure the whole domain, the org domain, is set up. So this is kind of a repeat process that you're going to be doing for this.
Okay. And for DMARC, do both DKIM and SPF need to be in alignment, or is it just one or the other?
It depends on the service, but in general, for the spec, in order to be authenticated and to pass DMARC, you need to pass SPF or DKIM or both. Certain services use both, certain use one or the other. With our platform, we can tell you about that real quickly, but if you're doing this yourself, which is what we're talking about right now, you're going to need to look this up on each vendor's portal, and they'll tell you how to set things up.
Okay. One of the challenges I think that people face is when you're making updates to DKIM and SPF, you're doing a lot of that in the DNS itself. Like, how does it work with Valimail? It's just a one-stop shop?
Yeah, so let me explain how it works with us, and then I'll tell you about how if you want to do it DIY. With Valimail, what you do is if you're, well, we do have a free product, so everyone can add these DMARC records and start gathering reports and seeing what we call as our services-based view, and I'll talk about that in a second. If you're doing it yourself, you need to put a reporting address in your DMARC record in DNS, to your point, start collecting these reports, parsing them out, and I'll talk about that in a second, but also maintaining your DKIM and your SPF. Now, the hard part with this is that you will need to make a lot of DNS changes, which nobody likes to do. But to your original question, if you use Valimail, what we do is we provide all of our customers with a very particular SPF record, and we give them setup instructions. So for example, if they were to onboard, the reason we give them that SPF record is so that we can combine our patented technology with some uniqueness in the SPF spec to directly address what is called the 10 lookup limit that Hunter talked about previously. And so with us, it's just, you point and click, really. You just say, hey, I use that service, because you'll see it in the reports, and then you just click the button.
Sure. Hunter, can you talk me through more about like this 10 DNS lookup limitation? I don't really understand, where did it come from, and like why is it such a huge hurdle for DIYers to overcome?
Yeah, of course. So the 10 limit lookup was created to prevent DDoS attacks. Currently at this time, multiple IPs are sending on your behalf, and those are the ones that have been approved to authenticate it for you. We did initially picture a ton of IPs sending on your behalf when this was being created originally, but now that there's so many sending services out there that ultimately have multiple IPs underneath them, this can be quite a bit of a challenge. So for example, what is the 10 limit lookup challenge? Is that if you were to look up IPs that were on the 11th or 12th or 13th lookup, they weren't in the first 10, they would be getting blocked because they would no longer be authenticating from that. To get around this, people will do IP flattening. They'll take that 12th, 13th, 14th, maybe 25th, whatever it is, IP, and add it into the first ones. And this creates a level where you're just authenticating a bunch of IPs, maybe allowing everything through an organization. And this can create some challenges when it comes to separating the different products that are sending on your behalf, or just allowing everything at once.
Sure. So with IP flattening, that can get kind of risky because, technically a bad actor could have access to one of those IPs, and you're kind of just batching them and saying like, all these are okay, without actually looking each single one up.
And they change.
Yeah, like just to elaborate on that a little bit more, what happens is if you're doing this yourself, like Hunter mentioned, you're going to need to look up these IPs. And back in the day, like when everybody had their servers in the server closet before moving to the cloud, yeah, that was easier to do. And, you didn't need to look up a lot of stuff. You knew what you had. But as things move to the cloud, now you have to decide, like from these reports, if you're not using Valimail, like, wait, do we use 243.157.12. Whatever? Or, oh, I know how to do this. I'll just go update my DNS because that's Salesforce. Well, it might not be Salesforce. It might be one of their other products that also send email. Or you could be like Hunter mentioned, saying, oh, I'll just add all of Amazon's hosting company, their whole ranges to my IPs, which you do not want to do, because if it's your server, you just want to have that one IP. So we see this back and forth. And again, with us, you just have that one statement and you simply add what's needed in the configuration.
So Kenneth, can you talk me through a bit more, like how does Valimail circumvent this whole like 10 DNS lookup limitation and make it easier?
Yeah, so with SPF in particular, there is that 10 lookup limit. And if you do want to do it yourself, the way it works is, let's say you need to, look at a tool like if you go to our website at the very top, it says check your domain. You can do this and you can get your SPF count. But let's say you're a small organization, because this affects everybody, not just small or large organizations. When there's a lookup done, it's on what is called an include statement. An include statement is what a vendor, like an ESP, an email service provider, will tell you to, hey, go put this in your SPF record. And you go do it. but you need to go triple check to see like, well, how many lookups are in that include? So let's say you're a small office and you have a corporate mail, you have payroll, which I personally like a lot. You have a calendar type event, you know, some kind of scheduling, and maybe one other service. And let's just say there are 4. Now, what you might not realize is the include statement for your corporate mail may be 2 lookups today or 4 tomorrow. The second one may have 3, the third one may have 2, and the last one, you know, you may be at 10 already. And so if you're a large corporation, yeah, you're definitely going to hit that. But even again, the small ones, when you see that, what you need to then do, if you're doing it yourself, is to go examine that include in DNS, try to parse out all the IP ranges that are in there, and then manually write out those IPs. Then you put that in your record, and you hope that you stay under the lookup limit, and you have to keep monitoring that to make sure there are no changes. Again, with us, we just have that one record, and you can have unlimited DNS lookups, because the way it works is with what is called a targeted SPF response or an instant SPF. We're only going to reply if you use Valimail with what's being queried against. So a receiving server gets that, let's say the payroll, and my server says, hey, domain, you're purportedly sending me my payroll. What's the SPF record for it? Will it pass SPF authentication? Valimail will only answer what's needed specifically for, let's say, ADP, which is a very popular payroll service. We're not going to chain down the list like with normal include statements like Hunter was talking about, and run the risk of hitting that 10th lookup as we spit all the stuff out, or as your DNS spits all the stuff out. Again, with us, just what's needed, just that one targeted response.
Awesome. So I think like what's interesting is once you set DMARC up, you're not necessarily doing anything. You're just basically creating a way to receive reports about what mail is being sent on behalf of your domain and whether it's passing or failing. Hunter, can you talk me through more about like what these DMARC reports are?
Yeah, of course. So when you set up your DMARC record, the first thing would be P equals none, and that's saying we're going to monitor state. And then the second part of this is where we would receive the aggregate reports. So the RUA equals an email address where that would be sent on to. With the Valimail platform, we would be then taking these aggregate reports that contains these XML data dumps, and we'd be parsing through those to understand which services are sending on your behalf. This can be a very tedious process. On top of that, there might be servers sending on top of senders, right? And it can be a long, challenging thing to just identify the 10,000 apps that exist in all the ecosystems. So they are challenging to consume. And on the foremost, they have some, very specific data that requires some niche knowledge is required regarding the senders there. So
if you're doing it yourself, you've set up a mailbox, you're getting these XML reports with, there could be dozens, there could be hundreds of IPs listed there of these different services sending email, but you don't necessarily know who is who. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. You're going to get these dumps of XML files from all the servers out there. What they're doing is they're saying, hey, domain.com, I purportedly got X amount of emails from you today. Here's a dump of this. Now you're going to need, I wouldn't do this manually, but you're going to need a tool. Again, we do have a free tool to show you our services-based view. But if you don't want to use Valimail, you're going to need some kind of parsing tool to figure out, well, what were those IPs that went through? Was it the actual IP or was it a forwarder? Was it the service that's being used or was it something else? Then you need to go, and the onus is on you and your team to figure out, was that IP from this service or not? And hopefully it is, and you can figure this out. Again, with us, and sign up today for Valimail Monitor if you'd like. We can identify thousands and thousands of sending services to show you, hey, this is everything that we're seeing purportedly sending as your domain. And it's up to you to decide, well, should that be sending as me? Or maybe it's a bad actor. I don't want them sending as me. But Hunter and I can talk about this for a long time. Like, Hunter, what are some of the other problems with the services that we've seen?
I think the main thing is when it comes down to just service owner identification, right? Making sure that we understand who is sending on what. As I said a second ago, there might be one sending service that is sending on top of another sending service. So there might be a small app that is using Microsoft Azure or AWS to send, and that's what we see at that time. Through our sender precision intelligence, we'll be able to automatically, show you all things that are going out, including those specific products that might be on a larger set of suites.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Kenneth, what were you going to say?
Now, just one other thing to add is kind of just reiterating what Hunter was saying, like with the AWS or the Azure stuff. And apologies if we keep trying to hammer this home, but it's very important. With other tools like DIY, a critical mistake we see is people mixing up IPs and services. So like Hunter was talking about with AWS, but there are a lot of services here that rely on each other for their infrastructure. So you'll see something like, maybe it's a small tool that only sends once a month or once a quarter, but it relies on SendGrid under the hood. You know, other vendors are doing it yourself. You're going to get confused about what IP that is. Or maybe, you know, like a larger one like Salesforce and Salesforce Marketing Cloud, you might think like, I know what that is. That's from Salesforce, but it might be one of their other products. So with us, we can identify those sending products and sending services and show you exactly what's needed.
Okay. So, you know, let's say that you've finally implemented DMARC. You're receiving all of these XML reports, but in its initial state, you're not actually doing anything with the mail. You're not telling the inbox providers to, you know, quarantine it or to stop it. You're just saying like, okay, this is out there. Can you talk me through what it means to implement a DMARC policy?
Sure. So like Hunter mentioned, you always want to start with P equals none, where you're just collecting reports and you're seeing what's sending as you. When you're ready, when you have everything authenticating the way it should be, then you're ready to go to enforcement. Now, the spec says enforcement is quarantine or reject. But with our customers, what most do, depending on the industry they're in, they go to quarantine first temporarily and then to rejects. Reject is the strictest. And what this means is you're telling receiving servers, it could be your own, could be global. Most people forget it's global. Let's all remember that, everyone on this webinar. So what you're saying is, hey, receiving server, if you get a message purportedly from my domain and it doesn't pass authentication, here's what you should do with it. So let's say today, my domain is at reject and someone tries to spoof my domain and it sends it to your address, Warren, at Gmail. So Gmail is going to say like, oh, hey, I got this message purportedly from Kenneth.com. Oh, it didn't pass SPF. It doesn't pass DKIM. So that's not authenticated. What should I do with it? The policy says it's reject. Don't accept it. So I just say, okay, fine. I'm still going to send the report to you later. So you'll see that someone was impersonating me, but that's what you're telling it. And so the goal is to do that. So only authenticated emails get through. You won't be able to spoof, like Hunter was saying, you know, on the same domains, any of the domains you own, inadvertently opening up subdomains, et cetera. And the goal with this and what's hard is you never want to block good email. So with Valimail, what we do is we recommend when you're ready, and we can move very quickly, when to go to this enforcement policy, because we don't like it to see when people try to do it themselves and they think they're ready. And then all of a sudden it's the 15th and they see like a new email campaign came out and they're like, oh, I got to roll back. Now I'm back at none. Okay, now I'm back at quarantine and et cetera. So when you're ready, move to DMARC enforcement. Don't block any good emails. And
Hunter, how do senders like accomplish this within the Valimail platform? Are they making DNS updates, or is it a complicated process?
Yeah, so once the first change is made to DMARC, when you're pointing to Valimail with those records, we would simply monitor. And like I said, get everything configured correctly. And then the second change would be the SPF and DKIM records put in place so that we can start authenticating. From there, we would then put in the policy of quarantine or reject, by quarantine going to the spam folder. The aggregate reports actually send back a summary of what is being done with those emails, as well as what is sending on your behalf. So we'll also start to see what is being put in quarantine, what is starting to be rejected. Now, the Valimail platform would automatically do this is through the visibility of those service identification. So we would say, hey, this is what is passing at this time. This is what is failing at this time. So there's no fear in going from none to quarantine or even quarantine to reject, because we would know exactly at that time what we would be blocking. Right, we will work with you to uncover every stone if that's your method to identify what should be sending on your behalf. If you guys have a more reactive method and people should be coming to the security team and saying, this is what should be sending on my behalf, then can we work with you as well to get to that method. Now, moving to quarantine to reject can be a little bit scary for teams, but people still jump into the spam folder and pull things out, right? That's the large source of some sort of phishing attacks to this day, is just getting people to pull it out of the spam folder. So we always recommend moving to reject. Now, that being said, we understand some marketing teams will always want their marketing email to be delivered. So you can put specific policies on subdomains, and you can get reporting on that all through the platform.
Awesome. So for a lot of DIYers, getting to P equals quarantine or reject is kind of viewed as this finish line. Can you walk me through what DMARC maintenance really means and why continuous enforcement is more of a process than just a set it and forget it achievement?
Sure. So again, with us, you would see all these reports and get alerts, for example, and take action like what Hunter was talking about. If you have a shadow email service or shadow IT, or you work with, let's say you do have a policy in place where your teams come to you, to the security team, and say, hey, we need to start using service X. Again, with us, it's one click. Now, we do want everybody to get to enforcement. And if you insist on doing it DIY, you're going to have to do stuff like this, Warren. So what you're going to need to do is, one, keep an eye on all these reports constantly. You're going to have to keep parsing out what we were talking about before. And just for everybody to remember, what we've been talking about is the RUA reports, the RUA reports. We don't need in Valimail the RUF. Those are being deprecated. They potentially contain PII. But again, you're going to need to use, if you don't use us, some kind of tool to parse these out, see if there's any changes in those IPs, do more flattening if a new service comes up, or if there's been a change, like I mentioned previously, like let's say, Microsoft does maintenance and they move O365 to a new range. They could do that at a moment's notice. With us, you don't need to do anything, but if you're doing it yourself, you're going to need to look it up, add that service, double check your SPF record, make sure you're under the lookup limit, change DNS if you're not, do the flattening, update DNS again. And just as a reminder, not to keep harping on this, but DNS is very fragile. I mean, that's one of the reasons we founded the company. Find the SPF, find the IP address, identify the service. It's just this constant loop. With us, we offer that continuous protection as a SaaS service, DMARC as a service, and it's very easy to do. Your team and you have other projects to work on. The last thing you want to be doing is spending hours and hours a week of looking up these IP addresses and things like that.
Sure. So Hunter, how does the Valimail platform work if you are at enforcement and let's say like a service gets added, like what do you need to do with our platform?
Yeah, of course. So you've pointed to us already. And if you haven't set up the SPF or DKIM, right, we would get everything set up correctly before that first initial go live where we're going to move to enforcement. If you do have that set up correctly, right, it's all through the same process. It is still the drop-down menu in the platform, but there would be, no later change. This does give all that tedious process of working through terminal, DNS changes, things like that, a user interface, right? You simply just go to our platform and everything's controlled from one pane of glass, which is, the easiest, I think, method for most people moving forward nowadays. The days of terminal are hopefully long behind us.
Well, the reality of DMARC is that DMARC is pretty difficult to manage yourself. That is the end of our slides. I have some questions that have come up here. The first is around determining who's responsible for different services that are sending email. So let's say you've got DMARC set up, you're consuming these XML files and you're seeing these different IP addresses. But how do you know who at your organization is kind of responsible for, Workday or Salesforce? How do you find those people?
Yeah, I can answer that. So with the Valimail platform, right, configuring things, as we've pointed out several times here with the automation, makes things pretty easy and quick to do, right, if you have the right people in the room. Now, like most security challenges, is getting the right people in the room and getting that information. Through the platform, through our thousands of services that we've been able to identify, we can work with you just to understand which departments these belong to. Now, we do have a new connection called Service Owner Identification, which is through our Helios product. This allows us to connect directly to your guys' email provider and make algorithmic assumptions on who is sending at this time from those different services. So, right, usually when you sign up for a new service, the first email you get is a verification email. There's some other things that we can look into, and then we can understand the sphere of influence who might be sending on that, right? With the Salesforce tool, right, that's obviously in the sales team, maybe Greenhouse, Bamboo, that's going to be with the HR department. But there's other smaller tools that really might be niche, or they might be servers that are internal tools, and we can help you identify those owners.
Oh, that's awesome. So you can like see like, oh, you know, Kenneth.Schwartzman at Valimail is receiving this authentication email. I'm going to go, you know, Slack him and say like, hey, are you responsible for the sending service? we need to make some DMARC updates.
Of course, exactly. And that can really cut down on time, right? Getting enforcement can be as little as, you know, 1 week in there, 1 to 3 months. It really depends on how fast we're able to identify the right people. And obviously this cuts down that time.
Awesome. Kenneth, I got a question about shadow IT that you mentioned earlier. Can you talk me through like what that is and how that can impact DMARC, or how it can impact mail being delivered correctly?
Sure. So a classic example, no offense, Warren, but like I like to make fun of marketing teams. Oh. But let's say we've had some customers in the past who were doing expansion, and they didn't have like corporate policies in place to say like, hey, in our, I was going to say student handbook, but employee handbook, if you're going to fire up a new service, you need to file a ticket. It goes to support, or it gets approved by finance or the security team. We've seen a lot of people where it's just, hey, we hired a marketing consultant. They're going to update our blog. They're going to do their thing. And they don't really, I mean, they communicate with people, but they may not tell you, oh, you all have been using Marketo forever. We're just going to suddenly fire up MailChimp. We paid for it with our credit card, and there goes some mail. Now, if you're not at enforcement, those are going to get through. They may not be aligned correctly, but imagine you're at enforcement. If you're using Valimail, you're going to get an alert, or our team is going to reach out to you depending on your support package and say, hey, did you just fire up this new service like MailChimp? Do you want it to authenticate? If so, let's just go click the 2 buttons and you're done. If, you know, but it does give you an opportunity from a non-technical standpoint to say, well, what should we do if someone fires up a service? Do we need to have an employee handbook with an update saying, hey, you need to run this by finance? That's great. If so, then yeah, you have quick actions of what to do. You can also not do anything. You can say, you know what, you didn't get permission. We're not going to let you just fire up whatever you want. You need to use our existing system. Here's an account on, I mentioned Marketo before. Okay, new consultant, just go use this system. So that's the classic example, but you can see this in the reports. We have organizations of all sizes, like suddenly a new service appears, or someone fired up a new instance of something, and you know, it allows you to take action of what you need.
That's great. Hunter, you mentioned time to enforcement. What does that kind of mean, and how long does it typically take for someone to go from, you know, just consuming these RUA reports to actually telling servers what to do with mail that they receive that either passes or fails DMARC?
Yeah, right. If you're under duress, we can do it as little as 1 weekend. We have done that in the past. Like I said, it's getting the right people in the room. Typically, we see 1 to 3 months. As far as, you know, we want to get a full quarter in to see how business workflows work, and see what email providers are sending on as you, right? You don't send an email every week from some services. Maybe it's once a quarter. So we want to get a full picture of what might be possibly out there before we go to enforcement, and then ultimately block a good email that needs to be delivered that, you know, makes the business run.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. Kenneth, what were you going to say? I
was just going to add to what Hunter was saying. We can move at your speed if you use Valimail. We have gotten people to enforcement over a weekend. That's an extreme circumstance due to, you know, there were some financial institutions that were being extorted, for example. We don't normally recommend moving that quickly, but with us, it's just that one-click enablement that we keep talking about. It's very easy to do. In fact, most people have more of a, like Hunter said, you know, you want to make sure we're not blocking good email. And we have a little bit of a delay built in, but it's usually not because of a technical reason. People need to understand, like, do I have permission to move to enforcement for the organization? And we tell you that right as you become a customer, like, let's work this out because you're going to get there faster than you need to be. And more importantly, like we keep saying, you're going to stay there, right? Work out these policies of what to do if I get an alert about shadow email. Can I go to enforcement next week? Because everything's going to be in the green in the UI very quickly. Things like that. I just wanted to get that in there. Again, If you're doing this DIY, you're going to have to like triple check and have these things in place for that. So
Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. Please be on the lookout for these slides getting emailed to you later, and we'll be posting a follow-up blog with all of the questions we didn't get to answer. I know there were quite a few out there. So yeah, thanks again.
Let me just add one other thing real quick. For those of you, if we didn't get to your question in the chat, if you're not a Valimail customer, please sign up for Monitor on our website. And if you are an existing customer, please email support@valimail.com or go to the support portal, which is support.valimail.com. We have articles for some of the questions that we're behind on, and we can get those addressed for you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.